just about completed.
Umbilical demate complete and nominal.
I can copy.
All right, we heard the confirmation the umbilicals have demated. Again, those provided hardline power and data connections. Those have now detached. The first set of 6 hooks are now driving. Reminder, we've got 2 different sets of hooks, each in sets of 6, 12 total. After the first set has released, we are committed to an undocking. So that first set, 6, is driving now, and we expect all of this to take another 3 minutes or so before we get that physical separation, when those thrusters on Dragon will fire and begin backing Crew Dragon Endurance away from the space station. So again, umbilicals have retracted. That undocking sequence being commanded right on time at the new time. At about 15 minutes after the hour, the first set of hooks are now driving to release. Following that, the next 6 will immediately start to disengage. And then once those have separated, the thrusters will fire. We'll get the 2 quick undocking burns. That first one only being about 1.5 seconds, so just a real quick pulse of those service section Dracos to start backing Dragon away, and then a slightly longer one of about 5 seconds to increase that rate. But we are on our way right now, still a couple of minutes until we get that physical separation, still waiting for that first set of hooks to disengage. But again, a lot already done to get here. The station itself still in the attitude control over on the US segment. We've done something called inhibiting desats, so essentially no thrusters on the station are able to fire right now. So attitude fully in control of the...
First set of hooks open and nominal. Second set of hooks traveling.
All right, first set open, second set opening. We are now committed to an undock, so this next set of 6 are going to open. We should have them open within the next 2 minutes, and then we'll get physical separation, and we'll call you an undocking time. And we're seeing nominal performance so far on the second set of hooks. Standing by should be within about a minute or so until this second set opens. That'll be all 12 opened, and there will be no physical mechanism still in place holding Dragon to the international docking adapter. We're looking at it attached to the forward port on the station to that docking adapter. As soon as this next set opens within the next minute, Dragon's going to fire a real quick burst, again about 1.5 seconds to start backing away, and that'll be our physical separation, and that'll be our time of undocking. After that initial undocking burn, we'll do another one lasting about 5 seconds to keep backing away, and then we'll do a couple of departure burns to eventually bring Dragon out over top of the station, around, and then underneath. But for now, we are all eyes on that last set of hooks holding Dragon in place, where it's been for more than 150 days attached to this forward port on the space station. Standing by for physical separation.
All hooks open.
All hooks open. Depart burn 1 has fired. Dragon Endurance undocked 262 statute miles over
and
the Coral
Dragon
Sea.
SpaceX on the big loop, separation confirmed.
Second copies, we see it.
So a successful separation. Again, Dragon undocking at 1:20 a.m. Central Time, 2:20 a.m. Eastern Time, with Dragon and station flying 262 statute miles over the Coral Sea off the northeastern coast of Australia. So with that, Dragon now stepping into
Depart
these
burn
depart
0
burns.
nominal.
Dragon copies.
All right, so undock burns completed. That depart burn 0 completed. Next one coming up in just a couple of minutes, but with Dragon now flying free, I'm going to toss it back over to Shiva and Leah at MCCX in Hawthorne to take us through the rest of the flight.
Thanks a bunch, Dan. So we had some great shots there of the first depart burn. We're coming up on depart burn. So that was the depart burn 0. Now we're coming up on depart burn number 1. Now this will be a short firing of the Dragon's Draco thrusters. The burn just lasting about 16 seconds. You can see that Dragon has begun to fly away from the space station, and these initial depart burns essentially increase the range rate from the station so we can get away from the International Space Station and get out of these various different spheres of control around the vehicle that keep both of the vehicles safe.
So we heard a call for successful depart burn 0. That 16-second burn, that increases the speed at which Dragon is flying away from the station. It's going to start to send it up and over the space station. It'll eventually come down and then behind the space station. This depart burn 0 puts Crew Dragon Endurance and Nicole, Josh, Koichi, and Anna on their journey home. So there's a good look at where depart burn 0 takes us. We'll also be standing by for depart burn 1. That's another short burn, about 21 seconds. That's going to keep us on that trajectory to go over and then eventually down and behind the International Space Station. Depart burn 1 is also going to be what's going to send us out of the keep out sphere. That is an invisible sphere around the International Space Station. It's a boundary, 200 meters in radius. And it helps us determine, or helps us govern visiting spacecraft arriving or departing the space station. So before moving into that keep out sphere, you have to, your spacecraft must be configured so that it would not cross that boundary for at least 4 orbits, even if for some reason it lost all maneuvering. So we monitor that before and after departure. Crew Dragon continuing to make its way further from the space station.
We're continuing to get some really cool views from the International Space Station cameras. So this one's got Dragon, and it looks like one of the robotic arms in the foreground, Dragon in the background. And of course, the opportunity today was a little bit delayed from the initial timing, but as a result, it turned out that we had better communications coverage so we could actually get some of these views from the space station. Now, Leah, I really like your explanation of the keep out sphere. I kind of analogize it to if you've ever flown into a major airport, there's an air traffic control team who's governing who can come into the airport, what timing they should go do that. And the keep out sphere is one of those imaginary constructs that allows the flight control teams of the visiting vehicles, as well as the flight control team in Johnson, to make sure that everyone is safe and no one is inadvertently entering to a place that is habited by people.
Yeah, and we have a couple of those boundaries. The keep out sphere is the one closer to the space station, and the other is the approach ellipsoid. That one is a 4 kilometer by 2 kilometer, again, an ellipsoid. It's more, it's not as much of a sphere. And it is also an imaginary shape, but it also helps us monitor those arrivals and departures of any and all visiting spacecraft.
Station on the big loop.
Right station.
Duke and Crew-5, magnificent sunset departure. You guys look great. Great job up here. We're going to miss you. Godspeed.
Awesome. Thank you, Frank, and the rest of the crew. We'll be following along.
Some kind words exchanged between the crew members. The They were talking about the big loop. So that is the way that we refer to the combined communications between Mission Control in Johnson, the International Space Station, visiting vehicle, so Dragon, and then, of course, controllers here in Hawthorne.
Yeah, and we were talking about the approach ellipsoid. So what we're in right now, where we're talking on that big loop, this is joint operations. Both mission control teams working together with Crew Dragon, with the space station, and we are actually coming right up on Depart Burn 1. So that's what's going to take us up and over the station. But yes, it must be a little. Oh, and confirmation that Depart Burn 1 has started. Again, this is about a 21-second burn using those service section Draco thrusters.
And every once in a while, thank you to the ground station or the ground operators on the Johnson side. They give us some higher.
Dragon SpaceX on the big loop, Depart Burn 1 nominal, and we see Dragon on a nominal trajectory away from station. At this time, you are go to doff suits per procedure 4.012. And finally, I have a reminder that the big loop will be deactivated following Dragon's exit from the approach ellipsoid.
Dragon copies, and to the teams at NASA and SpaceX, thank you for an incredible expedition. It has been your tireless efforts and attention to detail that have helped make this mission successful. I can't tell you how great it feels to be part of such an incredible team. And to the crew on board the International Space Station, you've got it. Make us proud. We'll be following along your mission. And to our friends and family, thank you for following along and being a part of our mission. It has been a privilege to add to the legacy. Semper Fidelis.
It is absolutely overwhelming to back away from the International Space Station and gain some perspective on the place we've called home for almost half a year.
Station copies,
All
too.
of us on
Safe flight.
are incredibly proud.
So a few
It's
things.
absolutely overwhelming to be backing away from the International Space Station and gain some perspective on the place we've called home for almost half a year. All of us on Crew-5 are incredibly proud of the work we've accomplished while we were there. And to everyone who had a role in Expedition 68, whether direct or indirect, you should feel the exact same way. We thank you, and we're excited to get back to that beautiful planet of ours and those wonderful people who live on it. Thank you.
That was a beautiful view of the space station. I see it. To all the mission control centers all over the world, thank you very much for your support. It's a privilege and a pleasure to work with all of you at the mission control centers. And Expedition 68 crew, Sergey, Dmitry, Frank, Steve, Woody, Saltan, and Andre, bon voyage, and we'll be following along. Thank you. ありがとうございました。さすが場所。
Very much for everyone, for everybody, for April 92. I really happy to have that stolen and visible and unforgettable in my life. It's really cool. Thank you very much for everybody.
Some words from all four Crew-5 members giving a final farewell to the International Space Station as...
And Dragon Houston on the big loop. Dragon has exited the keep out sphere. We wish you safe travels and looking forward to seeing you back on Earth.
Copy. Houston.
So we just heard from the Capcom, the capsule communicator in Houston, that Crew Dragon has exited the keep out sphere. That was the imaginary boundary we were talking about just moments ago. 200 meters in radius around the station, one of those safety zones while we are in joint operations that help us monitor any spacecraft arriving or departing. So before moving into the keep out sphere, again, that the rule essentially is you the spacecraft, if it for some reason lost maneuvering capability, it would not cross into that border for at least 4 orbits. But of course, departing, we don't have that same requirement. They are now well out of the keep-out sphere and heading toward the approach ellipsoid.
Yeah, that's part of the reason why we have all of those flight rules and the mission control teams there. Each operator is evaluating their systems to ensure that Dragon is safe to enter both the approach
Dragon
ellipsoid.
SpaceX on Dragon to ground for suit storage.
Go ahead, Jake.
Hey Josh, I've just got a reminder here 6 months later to store suits with helmet visors closed. How copy?
We got it. Thanks a lot for the reminder.
Some friendly words from your friendly neighborhood core. Of course, the crew have been on the space station for about 6 months. So the little quirks of how do you pack things in the vehicle safely to make sure, in this case, that the visors don't get scratched or damaged, just reminded them to keep them closed in the suit bag. They do actually get some training on the space station to kind of remind them about some quirks about the vehicle, actions that they need to take during the undock sequence and the departure sequence. So Josh acknowledging that.
Everybody needs a refresher every now and then. And again, we are outside of the keep-out sphere. We are standing by for approach ellipsoid exit. That's a 4 kilometer by 2 kilometer invisible boundary again. And once we are out of the approach ellipsoid, that ends joint operations. So the International Space Station mission control team will go back into their nominal configuration where they are just monitoring the space station, and the team here in Hawthorne will continue monitoring the return flight of Dragon Endurance.
Yeah, and one of the key differences with the approach ellipsoid is that vehicles outside of it have to be on what's called a 24-hour free drift safe trajectory. So what that means is if the vehicle had no ability to control its attitude, to control its orbital parameters, it would not be on a trajectory that could potentially interact with the space station for at least 24 hours. That gives time for ground operators on the ISS side to consider an adjustment to the ISS's trajectory, but ideally for the visiting vehicle team to work any issues.
Check from the mic, cabin mic.
Dragon SpaceX, we had you 5x5 on the cabin mic. Good comm check.
So call there from Koichi.
We have you loud and clear also. Thank you.
Now at this phase, because we're outside of depart burn 1 and on our way out of the approach ellipsoid, we've actually given the go to the crew to doff their suits. So that means taking off their suits. As we talked about a little bit earlier, there's an umbilical that connects the suits to the comm system, but once they're out of that, they actually have to use a cabin mic that's in the cabin, and we always want to maintain communication with the crew in case we need to provide them any urgent instructions or if they need to give us any information. So it's just a check there that all the systems are working as they proceed into a more comfortable phase of the phasing mission.
Now we are continuing to stand by for that approach ellipsoid exit, but if you saw as Dragon was undocking from the International Space Station, the colors shifted on the spacecraft itself, and that's because the International Space Station and Dragon entered in orbital nighttime. So they see a sunrise and a sunset every 45 minutes, which seems pretty inspiring, to be honest. And they even mentioned the beautiful sunset that they got as they were traveling away from the space station. Dragon is now about 600 meters away from the International Space Station with depart burns 0 and 1 complete as planned and heading toward the approach ellipsoid exit. Now, again, it's about a 19-hour ride home for the crew inside Dragon. Hopefully they get a nap in there somewhere, but they won't really be on duty during that time because the spacecraft is an autonomous one, so they don't need to take over and pilot it whatsoever. They are definitely trained to do so, as we've discussed, but if things are moving smoothly, which we anticipate, they should be able to rest and enjoy 19 more hours in space before they are back home sweet home.
There might be a little bit of a nice change of pace to have some off-duty time. I think I heard Dan mention earlier that the crew did have to sleep shift a little bit for this particular undock opportunity. We even caught a few views of them sort of resting up while they were in the vehicle waiting for the undock sequence. So during this off-duty period, they'll be free to use the amenities on board Dragon, to have a meal, to just sleep if they want to. And then, of course, as we get closer to the actual entry deorbit and landing sequence, then we will make sure that they have redonned their suits, have done their preparation for fluid loading, have confirmed that the cargo is all in a safe configuration for entry, and then they'll get suited up again in their seats for the deorbit burn and entry sequence.
Yeah, things are pretty quiet and from now until then. The next, like you said, big milestone, which they'll need to put their suits on for, will be that deorbit burn. That afterwards, we'll see the nose cone close. Obviously, that was open when we departed station. That's how the crew members ingress and egress the station. They have not used that side hatch in 6 months, so they'll finally get to open that up once again tomorrow once they're pulled on to Shannon, the ship that is waiting off the coast of Tampa for the splashdown tomorrow night. Yeah, and we had some views of it earlier when we were looking at the camera behind the crew. So if you can imagine in your mind's eye where the center display was, sort of straight past that is the forward hatch, and that's the hatch that they've been using to enter the International Space Station. That's one of the hatches that we closed today. The side hatch was a little bit lower down. The crew don't really interact with that. They can, of course, open it in an emergency on the ground, but the recovery teams will actually do most of the work there so the crew can stay nice and comfortable in their seats. And that also helps with some of the microgravity to gravity adjustment that we had been talking about. So I want to read off a few of these stats for our crew members. 3 of these crew members on Crew-5 are first-time flyers: Nicole Mann, Josh Cassada, and Anna Kikina. And then Koichi Wakata, he actually just completed 500 days in space just a few days ago. He will, by the time of splashdown tomorrow, have 505 days in space across 5 different missions. And for the other crew members, they will have logged 157 days in space by the time they splash down tomorrow. This crew saw 6 visiting vehicles arrive and depart. One of those was a Cargo Dragon SpaceX 26. That brought up some of the solar arrays that some of these crew members installed during some spacewalks earlier this year. There were 2 Russian Progress resupply ships, of course, Crew-6 arrival last week on the SpaceX Dragon, Soyuz MS-23, and the Northrop Grumman Cygnus vehicle NG-18. So some of those bringing crew, some of them bringing cargo, all welcome sights to our crew members on the space station. They also saw 5 of those depart, including 3 Progress resupply ships, the Crew-4 crew, who they said farewell to about a week after they arrived in the fall, and SpaceX 26, as we mentioned. Yeah, and the crew actually do have some role to play on those cargo missions. They, of course, pack and unpack the cargo that's in the Cargo Dragon vehicle. So Cargo Dragon being very similar to the Crew Dragon vehicle, but it doesn't have all the same life support systems. It doesn't have the displays, the seats, because the primary thing we're taking up is science and cargo for the International Space Station. The crew actually play a more hands-on role during the approach process, too. They've got procedures where they monitor the approach. Sort of if the ISS is pretty high up, and so it takes some time for communications and commands that we send from the ground to reach the vehicle. But the crew can actually send direct commands to the vehicle during the approach sequence if they needed to. So those crew were busy during that approach opportunity and the undocking as well. Oh, and of course, the unloading and the reloading and all of the science experiments that they brought with them. So we're coming up on about 1,000 meters away from the International Space Station. It was just a few minutes ago that we saw Dragon undock right on time, around 11:20 p.m. Pacific time. We are still waiting for it to exit the approach ellipsoid. Those two depart burns, 0 and 1, they are on the order of 16 and 21 seconds. So they really get the spacecraft moving, though, and we anticipate that call to the crew to come just about any moment now that we are outside the approach ellipsoid.
I actually just heard some calls on the loops here that we're out of the approach ellipsoid, so we'll probably hear a similar call
Dragon
from
and station
the core.
SpaceX
There it is.
on the big loop. The vehicle has exited the approach ellipsoid and is on a 24-hour safe free drift trajectory. To the Dragon crew, configure comm for Dragon to ground in preparation for big loop deactivation.
Dragon copy.
So the core, Jake, who we can see in the little window there.
Copy. Safe travels, Endurance.
Indicating to the crew that we've exited the approach ellipsoid. Again, that's that 4 kilometer by 2 kilometer by 2 kilometer ellipse. Sort of the long end is along the direction that the International Space Station is traveling around the Earth. We call that the forward direction. Core indicating that we're outside of the approach ellipsoid. Because we're outside of the approach ellipsoid and outside of join ops, we're actually going to be deactivating that big loop. So this is probably the last time that the crew are going to be talking to the International Space Station crew on this particular mission. I'm sure they'll talk to them when they get back home to planet Earth in about 19 hours from now.
Yeah, absolutely. So since it has exited the approach ellipsoid, like you mentioned, those joint operations are over. Crew Dragon is going to move into it's the rest period for the crew, essentially, like we talked about. They have doffed their suits. They're able to store those suits. They will, like you said, get the chance to sleep. And we are still targeting splashdown tomorrow at 8:02 p.m. Central, 9:02 p.m. Eastern Time. And that, I think, about wraps us up.
Yeah, they do have a couple more departure burns, and they'll have some return burns that adjust their phasing. But now that the NASA astronauts Nicole Mann, Josh Kashda, JAXA astronaut Koichi Wakata, and Roscosmos cosmonaut Anna Kikina have departed the space station, it'll take them about 19 hours to make their way back to planet Earth. They're in the middle of doffing their spacesuits. We actually have them dry the spacesuits, clean it out a little bit in case they got a little bit sweaty or anything inside while they were wearing them. The splashdown opportunity is targeted off the west coast of Florida near Tampa around 6:02 p.m. Pacific time tomorrow, or 9:02 p.m. Eastern time. And that'll be followed by one of our SpaceX recovery vessels approaching the vehicle, doing some safety checks, and then we'll recover them on board and then bring them out of the capsule so they can start their ride back home. Now, as they rest up on the Dragon spacecraft, our teams on the ground are going to continue to keep an eye on the weather around the splashdown opportunity to make sure that it is safe for that deorbit sequence and then eventually splashdown. And right now, the weather is looking fantastic out there.
And it, well, 9:02 p.m. I'm thinking 6:02 p.m. here. I thought we might be able to see it, but maybe a little dark over in Florida. So even though we're wrapping up coverage here in Hawthorne, the NASA team in Houston is still going to be monitoring the next phases of the Crew-5 mission. So our friends at JSC will provide continuous live audio-only coverage during Crew-5's journey home until we rejoin approximately an hour prior to splashdown tomorrow. And you can find that audio-only link by visiting nasa.gov/live and clicking the Mission Audio link, or you can search YouTube for NASA Mission Audio Live feed.
Now, we will rejoin for live video coverage starting about an hour prior to splashdown. Now, as always, you can find mission updates on Twitter at on, at NASA and at SpaceX, and of course at nasa.gov. We want to thank you for watching, and we're going to see you real soon for Splashdown.